session on editing for publication, we addressed the role of the editor in bringing writing from a standard, in bringing writing up to the standard at which it can be published. And we talked in particular about the role of the editor in bringing out the best in a writer. Very often writers are terrified of having their work edited in case somehow their own individual voice or the singularity of their work gets submerged in the process, and somehow their work is, reoriented or redone for publication. Instead of which, the role of the editor is to make the writing even more characteristic of the writer, to really make sure that the writer is bringing out the very best writing that he or she can, and that writing is true to the writer's voice. So it's a very laborious and slow process. It's not a process that necessarily begins with a professional editor. We discussed the importance of being one's own first editor, writing many, many drafts of a piece of work. Very, very often people write one or two drafts and think that's enough, but it's a rare person who will really achieve what they want to say in a single draft of any piece of writing, whether it be a academic piece or a reference letter, or not just in the case of creative writing, but any act of writing requires draft upon draft. In creative writing, after 4 or 5 drafts, it can be very helpful to get an outside voice to listen to the work. And we talked about the fact that could be a teacher or a publisher or an academic, but it could also just be a friend, a relation, our next door neighbor, anybody. In fact, arguably it might be better to have somebody who is not, strictly speaking, in the publishing field for that early edit, just to get a sense of what an objective, disinterested outsider would make of a piece of writing. Does it make sense to somebody? Does it sound viable to somebody who's not a professional, but who is a reader? We talked about the many hazards along the way. There were some very good questions about what happens when an editor and a publisher perhaps differ in their opinions. What happens if a publisher or an editor has an agenda? And we talked about the distinctive nature, as in character and personality of a good editor, that they must be somebody who's willing to almost erase themselves from the process and just to focus on the creative work of the writer, the artist. We also talked about the fact that the writer is the final person who has to take responsibility for what they do. It's the process of editing requires a lot of strength on the part of the writer. The writer cannot say, I didn't like those edits, but I had no choice, that's what my editor wanted. The writer has to be willing to be strong and, if necessary, remove themselves from the process. I personally think that should be happening more often. Very often, writers allow an editor or a publisher to publish them too soon. And I don't blame the editor and the publisher alone for that. I blame the writer as well. The writer needs to have the strength to say, this is not ready, and not to be rushed into publication if they know that their work is not yet at a quality for publication. On the other side of the coin, we discussed the perfectionism inherent in many writers. And it's arguable that some writers are such perfectionists that if nobody jollied them along, their work would never get into print. So there's a bit of a fine balance between the role of the editor-publisher as cajoler and instigator and pusher of a writer, and the role of the writer in having that final artistic signing off of their work.